following on from yesterday, if we consider example number 3, mate with the 2 bishops, did you notice how the goal of mate with 2 bishops was broken down? I think there were 3 fundamental parts. The first part of the strategy was to put the bishops on the optimal squares to restrict the black king. So the bishops went to g5 and f5. The next part of the strategy involved bringing the king up and required a little bit of knowledge. That is, we needed to know that the king needed to be either on h6, g6, or f7 or f8, keeping the diagonal pointing at h8 open, because that's where the bishop will deliver mate. The king needs to be on one of these 4 squares in order for mate to be delivered, and of course the black king has to be in the corner. With this knowledge, and given the starting position of the king heads for h6 or g6. Excuse me. And the third part of the plan, once the king had made it to one of these 2 squares, was to close the king down further and actually deliver mate, which involved a little bit of calculation. So there we have the plan, mate with the 2 bishops, broken down into 3 distinct steps. Optimise the position of the bishops to restrict the king as far as possible. Bring the king up to one of the squares required in order to deliver mate. Then use calculation to manoeuvre the bishops, restricting the king further and delivering mate. Now, a similar thing happens in the other example on queening a pawn. First of all, white must gain the opposition. He must advance until the king arrives on the 6th rank, obviously not, without leaving the pawn behind, depending on circumstances, but generally the king must gain the opposition and then advance until it gets to the 6th rank. The pawn can then be advanced up to the 5th rank, whatever black does, and then, once the pawn is on the 5th rank, again a bit of calculation. Do we have the opposition, or do we need to get it back to determine whether we move the king again to regain the opposition or just advance the pawn and queen? So again, 3 distinct steps. Gain the opposition and advance to the 6th rank. Move the pawn to the 5th rank. And finally, a bit of calculation to queen the pawn. Now, obviously these are very simple examples, but I hope it shows you how we need to break down a plan into its constituent parts in order to achieve the overall aim in a position. Very important. Now, there's other examples in the chapter and the rest of the book, but I think these 2 are the ideal ones to illustrate how to plan, and great reason to study the endgame. Now, the other thing that we really need to know about endgames is that really they're not, or rather the principles that we've studied for other parts of the game still apply. So they're not different in that sense. Activity is still key. Centralization is still important. And all the other rules that we talked about are important. But a couple of things in particular. First of all, in the endgame, the king can and should and must become an active piece. I think it was Grandmaster Gufeld I heard once say that the king is like a baby. In the beginning of the game, or rather the king is it's like our life. So at the beginning of the game he's like a baby. He must be looked after. We must take care of him. We mustn't let him out of our sight, if you like. We must protect him properly. In the middle game he's a bit of a teenager. Sometimes he wants to go for a wander, but for his own good we have to keep a good eye on him. But in the end game he's a fully grown adult and he must take responsibility and get involved in the game. So this is something different from the other parts of the game, if you like. The king is an active piece. Some people assign the value of 3/4 of a pawn to the value of the king, balancing it against the fact that he's obviously delicate and he doesn't want to get himself caught in a mating net. He can actually do some active work, and that value has been assigned to him when he's, say you've got a more active king against an inactive king, it can be worth 3/4 of a pawn. So that's one thing. The next thing that we have to know is that activity, well, it's still important, and we have to know something specific about pawns. It's very important in endgames to attack your opponent's weak pawns and to advance your own pawns. That is, to create a passed pawn and to advance your own pawns. Obviously, supporting them properly in the process of advancing them. So, activity, very important. Centralisation, material is still important, obviously. And everything we talked about before, still important. Particularly new, if you like, is the king must get involved and must be centralised in most cases. And then we must know about pawns. To attack our opponent's weak pawns is a primary goal of the endgame. And to create passed pawns and to advance them, our own pawns, is key. Excuse me. Now, tomorrow, we're going to look at a classic position in a rook endgame, which we can't avoid studying. Everybody must know it. I'm sure you've heard of it, the Lucena position. And this is very important to understand, and in particular in the endgame. And generally, rooks must be kept active. They are great attackers, terrible defenders. So sometimes, even if it's at the cost of material, it's important to keep your rooks active in endgames. There are a few exceptions where you would prefer to defend with your rook rather than keep on attacking, even if it means at the cost of some material. Active rooks are vital. Okay, that's all for today. We'll get back to it tomorrow with those active rooks and the Lucena position. This is Roy Phillips. Thanks for your attention.